Welcome to He Calls Me Deborah, beaming a light of hope. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about living a well-navigated life, to determine your destination and stay the course. I just returned from sailing in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was memorable and inspired me to consider material for today's show and to think more and find out more about sailing. We actually sailed on one of the schooners that can be chartered from the Seafood Industry and Maritime Museum. A schooner is a vessel that has usually 2 or more masts. One of the masts, the foremast, is smaller than the main mast, and the typical schooner has 2 sails but can often have up to 7. It was a lot of fun, and we sailed for 2.5 hours along the coast there, where we passed Beau Rivage several times and just had a very lovely evening. So it did challenge me to find out a little bit more about sailing and sailboats. Sailing requires an understanding of the main parts of a sailboat, and there are 8 essential parts. You have your main sail. The main sail catches the wind to propel the boat forward. You have a mast. It is along and aligned with the vertical side at the front to help the boat go faster. Your jib is an additional sail at the front to help the boat go, the jib helps the boat go faster. The mast at the vertical sail at the front of the boat supports the main sail. The hull is the base of the boat, and that's where you sit. The keel steadies or keeps the boat from tipping over. That's a good thing. Your rudder is like the tire on a car. It's used to change direction. The tiller is the steering wheel, and it goes along with the rudder. The rudder tells the tiller where to go, and the boom is attached to the horizontal side of the main sail. First, you have to determine your destination. And what does it mean to navigate? As a noun, according to oxforddictionaries.com, navigation is the process or activity of accurately ascertaining one's position and planning and following a route. To navigate accurately requires some essential tools. First of all, where are you? Where are you now, and where are you headed? Where is your destination? Because obviously you're going from point A to point B. Maybe sometimes you're even thinking about your ultimate destination, your destiny. There are 3 main types of navigation. One is celestial, GPS, and map and compass. A navigation system like GPS, a Garmin, or Siri's amazing. She can take you anywhere you want to go. How does she know all those things? Or you can use the map and a compass. Accurate calibration is important, and with a Garmin, if you take a wrong turn, it will automatically recalibrate. Sometimes it takes a few minutes, and sometimes I feel like I might even get the Garmin confused. But no matter where I turn, he recalibrates me. Recalibration, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is to make small changes in an instrument so that it measures accurately. Or it is to change the way you do or think about something. Experience has taught me to be aware and pay attention to our perception of things. We've talked about that several times in other segments. Our perception affects how we live life. I have a small brass sailboat on my desk at home, and it is engraved on the sail. Engraved on the sail are these words: "The man who walks with God always gets to his destination." Whose destination? God's destination for those who follow him closely and who pay attention to his guidance. Just like when we listen attentively to the Garmin or Siri as she navigates our way from point A to point B, the device has our full attention. Usually. That's always best. Otherwise, we're going to get recalibrated. So what's a navigator? A navigator is a person in a vehicle who decides the direction in which the vehicle travels. In spiritual terms, think of the vehicle as the vessel. We are a vessel, the conduit, if you will, of the Holy Spirit. He is our navigator. A well-navigated life is one led by the Holy Spirit and enriched with a special strength of the Holy Spirit, that inner inaudible voice to which we must pay attention. So what moves a nautical vessel? The wind. And the wind is the horizontal motion of air. Wind is essential for moving the vessel forward, and wind is also a force of nature over which we have no control. But there are different types of wind. A skilled navigator understands the wind and steers the vessel appropriately, making the necessary adjustments with the sails. It requires a lot of skill. True wind is actually, it blows across the land or water. You feel true wind when you aren't moving. Apparent wind, on the other hand, is wind you feel when you are moving. When you move and the wind moves, you feel apparent wind. I didn't know that, so I learned something different. There's also sailing into wind. When you're sailing downwind, you're parallel to the wind, and the boat will blow into the sails. If you're sailing upwind, you're going into or against the wind. Now, this is an almost impossible situation. So the captain of the ship has to tack multiple times. And to tack means to turn the front of the boat into the wind. If you're leeward, the boat is going away from the wind. If you're luffing, the boat is too close and it's going into the wind. So ideally, you want the wind to be to the side of the boat. Why? Wind is faster than the boat. Air is slowing down by the sails. Sails push against the wind, and the wind is pushing the sailboat forward as the air pockets in the sail, pushing the boat forward. So again, it's the air captured in the pockets that push the boat forward. Well, there's an analogy of the Holy Spirit and the wind. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but do not know where it comes from and where it is going. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit. That is John chapter 3, verse 8. Jesus was speaking to the disciples, and he was speaking to them of the power that they would receive when the Holy Spirit came upon them. And when he said this, when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And that is John chapter 20, verse 22. And then there is Acts chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, which say that, "And suddenly there came from heaven a noise like a violent rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them." This is a powerful phenomenon that is still taking place today. So what tools are needed or used by the navigator of a sailboat? Well, one is a compass. Each compass has a line on its glass, and this is called the lubber line. The lubber line is used to mark your direction on the compass card. The compass card is the rotating card that says north, south, east, west, so on. You pick a course using a marine chart. You start by determining your starting position. And the easiest is to use your marina. Take that as your starting position because typically it will be on the map. And then you pick your destination. You determine the course by drawing a line between these 2 points and reading the angle or degrees. You set the course by steering the boat to the direction where the lubber line on the compass matches the degree you chose exactly. It must line up and match exactly. You keep or stay the course by making sure your lubber line stays put. Generally, you can just use the above method to set and keep your course, but it can prove inaccurate with longer journeys due to drift and tidal currents. Now, drift is referred to the current speed, usually measured in knots. Ignoring set and drift can cause a mariner to get off their desired course, sometimes by hundreds of miles. So you don't want to ignore your drift. A mariner needs to be able to steer the ship and compensate for the effects of set and drift upon their vessel while underway. So he has to think very fast, and he again has to be very accurate to compensate for the effects of set and drift upon his vessel. Tidal currents occur in conjunction with the rise and fall of the tide. The vertical motion of the tides near the shore causes the water to move horizontally, right? Creating currents. When a tidal current moves toward the land and away from the sea, it floods. When it moves toward the sea, away from the land, it ebbs. The ebbs and tides. As followers of Christ, the ebbs and tides of life may inevitably affect our spiritual condition. Our walk with God is a life-shaping journey, and it takes time. He gives us a river of life, but unfortunately, sometimes this river can get blocked. A well-navigated life stays the course set by the Holy Spirit by staying sensitive to the quality of our spiritual condition. If we're intent upon reaching God's destination for us, if we sense that we have strayed off course, we will make the necessary adjustments to get back on track. We'll realign ourselves with the Spirit of God and do what it takes to recalibrate. Watchman Nee, according to ministrysamples.org, speaks to this when he writes about the ebbing of the Spirit. He says, "There is indeed ebbing and rising with the tide, but is there an ebbing and rising in our spirit as well when it only has God's life and power? God's life does not ebb. It is forever flowing. His life is not like the tide of the sea which rises and falls. It is like a river which flows forever with living water." And this is from John 7, verse 38. God's life within us is not like the tide which must ebb after a certain time. The source of life within us is God. He never changes. And with Him there is no shadow of turning. Hence, the life in our spirit should flow unceasingly and should continue to overflow and spread. God's life is a river of living water within us. If there is no hindrance, it flows on forever. It is possible for believers to have a lasting, flowing experience. And according to Watchman Nee, he is of the belief that any kind of ebbing is unnecessary and abnormal. Hence, the question is not one of the ebbing away of the spiritual life, but of doing something to make it rise again. The present need is not a question of filling the river, but one of facilitating the flow. The river of life remains in the believers, but it's blocked. So once a believer feels that his spiritual life appears to be ebbing away, he should find out where it is blocked. Satan will make you feel like your spiritual life has regressed. Others may feel like you've lost your spiritual power. And you yourself may even think that you have committed some great sin. Now, this may be true, but it may not necessarily be true. Actually, the real reason, according to Watchman Nee, is that many believers do not know how to cooperate with God and fulfill God's condition for an unceasing flow. Ignorance is the greatest cause of such a phenomenon, and he suggests, therefore, that a believer should immediately pray, meditate, test, and search. Pray, meditate, test, and search. You should wait on God and ask the Spirit to reveal the reason for the ebbing away. You should be living and find out if you have failed to fulfill some conditions for a continual flow of the spiritual life, which led to such an ebbing away. Again, being sensitive to your condition, your spiritual condition, you sense when something in your spirit is not flowing the way that it is when you're feeling closely connected to the Spirit of God. Not only should you acknowledge that you have setbacks, and that's an important step in itself, but you should actively seek the reason for such setbacks. Once you feel the reason or find the reason, you should immediately repudiate it. Now, what repudiate means is to refuse to be associated with, whatever that is. Do not imagine that spiritual life flows out spontaneously. If you do not remove the reason for the blockage, the flow will not resume. Hence, every time there is a spiritual ebbing away, we should immediately seek to find the reason through prayer and meditation. So Watchman Nee says that we must repudiate, again, refuse to be associated with, whatever the behavior for which we are guilty is. And then he says life will flow again, will be invigorated. The Spirit will become more powerful, even more powerful, and strengthened to storm the strongholds of the enemy, to reset and stay the course. Stay the course means to persist in an action or policy, remain with a plan despite criticism or setbacks. This phrase is said to be based on a sailing metaphor of keeping an unchanged course in navigation. A well-navigated life for Christians means to persevere, to persist, and stay the course, despite the trials and tribulations, the setbacks you encounter along the way. You identify the source of and clear any blockage you are experiencing with the river of life. Back to the sailboat. The rudder is used to steer or change direction. Like the tire on a car, the rudder is used to steer or change the direction of the sailboat, the direction the sailboat's going in. And likewise, our words have the potential to steer relationships. We can elevate others with encouragement, we can bring them down with discouragement, or we can leave them in the same position we found them in, unchanged, to do no harm. James 3, 1 through 11 speaks of taming the tongue. James 3, 4 through 6 says, or take ships as an example. Although they are large, they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of his life on fire, and is itself set on fire in hell. On the other hand, consider James chapter 3, verse 2. We all stumble in many ways. If anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. And by this, what is meant by perfect is disciplined, managed by the strength of his discipline. It isn't self-discipline. It's discipline through surrender to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit gives him the strength. The well-navigated life is disciplined and shows self-restraint. What you say and what you don't say are both important. Proper speech is not only saying the right words at the right time, but it's also controlling your desire to say what you shouldn't, right? Words once escaped cannot be taken back. Examples of an untamed or unrestrained tongue include gossiping, putting others down, bragging, manipulating, false teaching, exaggerating, complaining, flattering, and lying. Before you speak, ask, is what I want to say true, necessary, is it kind? The anchor. Well, the anchor holds the boat by digging its flukes into the bottom, the seabed, not just by lying there like a weight on the bottom. If the anchor is not set firmly in place, well, the boat may seem well anchored until the wind comes up, and then the anchor's just going to bounce along the bottom of the boat as the boat drags toward a hazard. There is no one anchor fits all, however. I discovered that the anchor you select must be suited for the vessel upon which it is appointed. There are anchors that are best for larger boats, smaller boats, best for different substrates and changing weather conditions, also best for strength, and even a best lightweight variety. So the captain of the ship must have confidence in the reliability of the anchor with which he and his crew are traveling. A well-navigated life trusts God's unchangeable promises as an anchor of the soul, firm and secure, enabled to live with encouragement, assurance, and confidence because of that trust in His unchanging promises. Hebrews 6:17 through 19 assures us of the reliability of God's promises as an anchor for our faith. Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of His promises very clear to the heirs of what was promised, we're the heirs as followers of Christ, as Christians. He confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered us may be greatly encouraged. Verse 18 says, "We have this hope as an anchor of the soul, firm and secure. Now, these two unchangeable things are God's nature and His promise. God embodies all truth, therefore He cannot lie. And because God is truth, we can be secure in His promises. We don't need to wonder if He's going to change His plans. Our hope is secure, immovable, and anchored in God. Just as a ship's anchor holds firmly to the seabed. To the true seeker who comes to God in belief, God gives an unconditional promise of acceptance, while Jesus, as high priest, continually intercedes on our behalf as we live intentionally, staying the course, leading to our ultimate destination. Thank you for joining us. Next time we're going to be talking about selfish care, self-care, and soul care. Nathan Foster in Renovaire.org says or advocates learning to intentionally navigate life at a livable pace, to move with grace and intentionality as we approach life and the way we spend our time. That should be informative and helpful for all of us. See you next time.